Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being with us this morning for the press conference at the opening of the International Architecture Exhibition of the Biennale. Let me give you some figures to start with. A few informations. We have as far as the press is concerned, we have 3,256 accredited journalists, of which 1,498 from Italy, 1,758 from abroad. Within the exhibition, you will find 71 participants to the exhibition, but then, furthermore, within the two special sections that the curator had introduced within as a part of the exhibition, which is the section called Close Encounter, 16 participants. The Practice of Teaching, 13 participants. National participations are 63, and we welcome. We have for the first time the participation of Antigua and Barbuda, Saudi Arabia, Guatemala, Lebanon, Pakistan, and the Holy See, i.e. the Vatican. We have 12 collateral events and two special projects. The one is so-called Forte Marghera project, with the project of the architects Sami Rintala and Dagur Eggerson, and then the special project of the Pavilion of Applied Arts, a joint initiative by the Biennale and the Victoria and Albert Museum, with a project curated by Christopher Turner and Olivia Horsfall Turner. In all these biennales, we have been implementing more and more opportunities, more frequent opportunities for the visitors to meet architects or artists in the case of the Biennale of Art. There is a program called Meetings on Architecture. That, of course, is among the information that you can gather at the entrance or in any leaflet of ours. They will be carried on from Saturday next to the end of the exhibition. Among these, we have meetings with on architecture organized by the national pavilions, and we have one organized together with the London School of Economics, Department of Cities, and the Alfred Herrhausen Gesellschaft, and one with the Victoria and Albert. And then we'll have an edition of the Cortile dei Gentili, which is an initiative organized by the Department of Culture of the Holy See. 65 universities are taking part to the Project Biennale sessions. We have to thank our partner Rolex. We want to thank our sponsors, and I mentioned them all, because Artemide, Edison, GTI, Vela Venezia Unica, Oakmont, Paola Lenti, Seguso Vetri Arte, Trenitalia. I want to thank the Ministry for Culture of Italy, all the institutions of the region and the local authorities, and the Comune di Venezia, the Sovrintendenza, the Marina Militare. All of them are somehow directly or indirectly in the organization of the exhibition. And we have a number of donors to whom we are really very grateful for their generosity. It's a long list which can be found in the catalog. But among these, I want to especially mention the Department of Culture, Heritage, and the Gaeltacht of Ireland, who have been generously supporting the curators. I am personally, this is for me the 7th Biennale of Architecture. And if anything, I've enjoyed the opportunity of having a chain of biennales that I really suggest you to read as a chain, as different chapters, because each biennale, which has been thought by itself, which is the result of the generosity of the curator who engages himself or herself and brings here the result of long time thinking, of long time experiences in these fields, or in the arts, or in the world of architecture. But each of these biennale are the result of a choice. They are not congresses or meetings on architecture. The biennale is a result of a choice, and the more courage has the curator in general, the best is the result. The more clear is the choice, the best is the message and the information that we provide our visitors. So this biennale is somehow, as I said, to be read as a chapter that follows the Ravenna Biennale, the Colas one, and so on and so forth. And it has chosen among the different point of departure, among the different point of observation, then you can choose to look at this wonderful and multifaceted discipline. They have chosen the one which is, in my opinion, the most political of it. Talking about architecture as the art through which we as individuals, taking care of our selfish needs, can provide the space around us as the space where we all live, and the quality of this space may be the result of architecture as well as the quality of the space in which we, as single individuals, live. Architecture has this gift of making it inevitable to provide to all of us to organize the space in which we live whenever anybody builds something for his own specific and individual needs. So it's a discipline that invites us to think immediately, i.e. to the generosity that can be considered while making project, or to the public utility that can be taken into consideration by those who are planning or public institutions who are considering developments. And that invites us to consider that we have, through architecture, we might have an additional wealth to our welfare, our personal welfare as a community. And not considering that, we might be all poorer for just a lack of courage of thinking, a lack of desire to dedicate ourselves to the thinking of the place that we want to live and want to inhabit. Abitare, wohnen, is a word that is a verb that has been discussed through decades very much, but abitare for us means exactly that. There is an abitare which is that corresponds to the satisfaction of our personal needs of welfare, personal security, and so on. But then there is an abitare which is considered that we are part of the community in which we live. And we are citizens, if you want. So, and this sort of the generosity which is considered in this exhibition by Farrell and McNamara as a possible, not a detail, but a possible one of the main aspects of the project, of course, needs that the community knows, consider, and desire that the behavior of all of those who are engaged in organizing the space in which we live, be them public institutions, or we ourselves, and the architects that we call upon to help us in building this form of complete abitare, we have to be more endowed with cultural instrument to know that things can be done differently. But it's a biennale that talks to the responsibility of the individuals. We are part of those who build our buildings, our cities, our landscape, and so on. We are not the passive recipient of what is done, and we have to cancel from our mind that all what is done is a necessity that has to be accepted, passively accepted. We as citizens are proud of our being citizen of the world in which we live, and the architecture is somehow telling us that side by side with the right to have a house, we have the right to have a free space. So it's architecture once again goes, and it's another way of considering architecture, and its extreme way of considering architecture is as a part of the constitution of the community. And in this spirit, the exhibition shows projects that are, there is one aspect of this exhibition that most of the projects that are shown, they deal with the matters, arguments, and situations which are not far away from each of us. They are there in front of us. They deal with questions that we might find and might belong to our own questions that deal with the space in which we live, that are in the reach of our space of living, a space of knowing, a space of our knowledge, within the border of our life. So architecture comes back from where it was. It has been taken in the past decades to divert our attention towards spectacularity, and she's back in front of us as a tool for us to become a more developed sort of community, and to be once more in touch and with our reality, and to make us more able to command our own life. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It is a great honor for Shelley and I to sit here in front of you in this incredibly beautiful city of Venice. I will speak first, and then Shelley will speak, and I will discuss two things, the buildings themselves and the manifesto. We have said that we are architects and not curators, and that we came after the wonderful invitation from President Baratta to be involved in this Venice Biennale, and we came to look at the buildings themselves. We looked at the Corderie, we looked at the Ateliere, we looked at the Gajendra, and we looked at the Central Pavilion. And each of them had, or has, a very distinct personality. We looked at the space, we looked at the construction, we looked at the light. And first of all, we revealed the light in the Corderie. And what was amazing, we asked to see the Corderie with nothing in it. And for us, what was extraordinary in this incredibly beautiful and complex city, that we found a space which was over 300 meters long, held by brick and plaster and timber and tiles, that this space itself became a participant for us. So for us, what was really interesting then in the central pavilion, in the Giardini, that this was a complex of approximately 22 rooms, each of which had its own character and had the possibility of zenithal light. So we took back all the coverings of the ceilings and the roof to reveal these beautiful rooms in the amazing light of Venice. And as we did that, we also discovered things that had been hidden. It was like being detectives. We found a beautiful window and shutters by the amazing architect Carlo Scarpa that over the years had been layered by plasterboard and had been hidden. So for us, uncovering these gems and sharing them with you, not only the beauty in themselves, but also the relationships that they made. They open out, you now view onto the canal, you now view through the shutters to the space and the greenery beyond. So it links the buildings to the place it is. The other thing we wanted to do was to check our structural possibilities to link this matrix of rooms to one another, both physically and intellectually. As we placed the participants in various positions in these rooms, we could break through in certain places, and that we made these thresholds colored so that you move from one distinct space into another through a space of color, and that you're able to orientate yourself. Another thing that happens because of that, we find, is that intellectually and conceptually, you're able to link things that were not necessarily linked together before, and changes, if you like, your perception of these buildings. And then when you move from the mains, going back to the Corderie, and you turn into the Atelieri, which has an amazing structure and has light on both sides, reflecting light from the canal on one side and into the courtyards on the other. So it's really important for us to encourage you as human beings to realize that these spaces in themselves are participants and that there's a beauty in themselves before the participants enter in their elements of submission. When we moved out to the Gagandra, we found that the two bodies of water, the stone, the brick, the timber structure, and the tiled roof, made this space absolutely stunning in itself. So what we've done is that we have placed a number of marble benches on which to sit and enjoy this space from the past. It's something that's really important for us to encourage each, both practicing architects and non-architects and the general public, to sit and appreciate the things that we have. And for us, the Gajendra is an absolutely beautiful space facing west, and we'd encourage you at the end of the day as the sun is setting to sit in this space as well. During the day it's cool because it's in shadow and because it has this two bodies of water, and because of the shape of the stone, it keeps the water incredibly calm. The other aspect of my section with you this morning is to discuss the manifesto. And for us, it was a wonderful thing to be asked to do. It was the first thing the president asked us to do upon inviting us to become curators. And it meant that Shelley and I needed to write down the things in our architectural lives that we felt were important. And we chose the topic of free space for two reasons, I suppose, that we wanted space to be in the word because architecture is about space. Less in our minds about the object of architecture, but the space in which we humans stand. And that space is the void, and Alejandro de la Sota calls and says that architects should make as much nothing as possible. So the space that's contained by the materiality of surfaces is the thing we're interested in. And free, we wanted free to be the, if you like, the aspiration. This is the thing, the gold mine, the line of where a generosity of spirit where a sense of humanity might enter in. And it's interesting, I mean, it's quite a robust little document. It's two pages. And the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces really describe a generosity of spirit, that architects really need to deal with the unspoken wishes of strangers, that as architects we need to find additional and unexpected generosity in each project, that we should look at nature for its free gifts, that light, sunlight and moonlight, air and gravity and materials, these man-made and natural resources are the things that we use as architects. And the free space, we're also thinking of new ways of thinking, new ways of seeing the world. And really our profession, I suppose it is true to say that over the last focused months working on this Biennale for public presentation, we're really very aware that the earth is our client and that this is a fragile place, and that the responsibility of being an architect and using the natural resources falls on our shoulders. We're also talking about space as a space for opportunity, for unprogrammed things to happen, that architecture is active as well as passive. And what is really important for us, I suppose, is that architecture is the free space of time and memory, and it does bind the past, the present, and the future. For us, I suppose, communicating to the non-architect is really a very important issue, because architecture involves us all, not just us as a profession. We're incredibly privileged to be architects, but what is really important is that we try to communicate in the manifesto that free space is not a complex manifesto, we hope, that in the last piece, when we talk about the Jørn Utzon seat, that architecture spans between a tiled concrete seat in front of a house in Mallorca to, I suppose, Utzon's ability to represent a whole nation with his wonderful building in Sydney in Australia. And we end the manifesto with a Greek proverb: a society grows great when old men plant trees under whose shade they know they will never sit in.
So we use this manifesto as our guide, and in our research for projects, we used it as a kind of checklist to find architects and samples and representations of these values, because also President Bharata kept asking the question, what will the message be? So on the one hand, we have an inclusive range of projects, but on the other hand, we had to think about how we would make something which had some kind of cohesive message. So it's about diversity, but it's also about somehow about having some clarity. And what we're enjoying now with our team, we were saying yesterday that we feel a bit like a farmer in the harvest time, where we're seeing the crops coming into being. And it's fantastic to see the passion and the energy of all of the participants, and to see all of the wonderful exhibits that are being constructed. And what we're also enjoying is the effect of the curatorial spatial strategy, for instance, that Yvonne has described in both the Corderie, the Artigliere, and the Central Pavilion, how that leads to different overlaps and connections which maybe are unexpected. The kinds of projects that we have, when you see coming together in one space, because of having people from so many different countries, that you're kind of transporting the culture of architecture to Venice, but you're also transporting very different, diverse cultures into one place. And it's wonderful to somehow see the difference, but also to see the connections. We were in the Corderie yesterday, or the day before, and we were looking at a 100-meter long residential building in Indonesia, which is a couple of meters away from a kilometer-long residential building in Rome. And you actually see that what we believe in architecture is that it is a global language, because we're all human beings. And there's something really interesting about that. And there's the thing in the Central Pavilion which we really wanted to also develop, which is that the time in architecture is not linear, that it's a spiral, and that the contemporary and the ancient can be brought together in one place. And that the architects who are no longer with us have a place in the Venice Biennale, because we, as practicing architects, we refer to work from all periods and from all locations, let's say, and cultures. And when we see things like, in terms of education, different ways of education, the different projects, we have a kindergarten in Japan beside a school in India, and you can feel the different cultures in terms of how people think about education, how people think about children and safety and play, and how people think about deinstitutionalizing education, perhaps, or somehow reintroducing the feeling of play, irrespective of whether it's a university or a kindergarten. And we see with all of the architects this belief that that architecture is to bring people, is there to bring people together, be it in terms of enjoying each other's company, or the overlap of knowledge, or the casual encounter, that is somehow present in all of the different works that we enjoy around the room. And when we look, for instance, at examples of reuse, it's fascinating to see the reuse of a space in an opera house in the same building as the reuse of a psychiatric institution, and how the different, very imaginative approaches of the architects deal with conservation or preservation, which is not about freezing buildings in time, but it's about renewing the life and the inherent qualities of building in terms of time. And there's also the thing of infrastructure and acupuncture, that infrastructure happens at the very large scale, where transformative landscapes deal with flooding or deal with services, from Olmsted to a project in Manhattan, which is about flooding. And then there's, or a public park, say, in the US, in Seattle. And at the same time, you have infrastructure happening, infrastructural projects happening at the micro scale, which is about the enormous sensitivity and commitment of architects, making small, highly intelligent insertions, sometimes into places where there's very little scope and there's very little money. And there's something really fantastic about that. It really is about releasing energy, and about the patience and the love of the architects in terms of what they invest into their work. And what's also really interesting, I think, at the moment, in terms of the world that we live in, because Yvonne and I, we're celebrating architecture here, but we're also acutely aware of how difficult it is to find the space to make architecture in contemporary society. And President Baratta describes that extremely eloquently in the way that only an Italian can do, we think, when he talks about architecture, and that our role is to grow desire for architecture. And we all have this problem as practicing architects of how do we find space for architecture? How do we find space for culture? And what's really refreshing is to see the different forms of practice that architects are undertaking to somehow sidestep the obstacles and find ways of making insertions or making contributions to society, even at a time where sometimes it appears that it's not maybe desired adequately, it's not supported adequately, and that's something that we really appreciate what the Biennale does, that it's about somehow reminding people that architecture matters, that it affects all of us. And Yvonne spoke about the manifesto and the language of free space, and that's something that we think is really important. That not just in terms of the actual language, but in the language of architecture, that architecture shouldn't feel remote from the ordinary person, that it shouldn't be simply about power and commerce and the kind of somehow assertion of power, that it's also to do with how the ordinary person, the ordinary human being can connect what it is that architecture should or could do for them, and that it's not a remote thing, that that's not for them or not achievable or not accessible. And that's something that we feel really strongly about. So we, having traveled this very interesting, challenging journey, somebody asked us yesterday, what do we think about the state of architecture? And we find, having dealt with 100 architects in total, that it's so energizing to feel the passion and the commitment for architecture in the way that architects are making work throughout the world. The commitment, the skill, the imagination, the invention, the strategic cleverness to survive, that we have felt that energy from so many people from different parts of the world. And that's enormously energizing. And something that we say is that as architects, in the end, we can't not be optimistic, because every day, not every day, if we're lucky once a year, twice a year, we are being asked to make a new project. And in order to make a new project, we have to imagine a new world for that person who's asking us to make a house or a school or a bridge or a university. So we're always imagining the future. So you have to be optimistic. You can't not be optimistic if you're imagining a future. And we also believe that you actually can't really make architecture unless generosity is at the core of the agenda of the architect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Shelley. Waiting for questions. If anybody wants to, please raise his hand, her hand. There are microphones walking around, and suddenly they will appear in front of you. There we are.
Hello, Shelley and Yvonne and President Bharata. Sandra O'Connell here from Dublin. Congratulations on the Biennale. What strikes me about it, that it celebrates the craft of making. It's a very sensory environment that you have created through models, textures, materials, light. Is this something that you actively encouraged in the 71 participants? How much direction did you give the 71 participants? Because they seem to have responded very well to that theme.
Thank you.
Good morning, Sandra. It's a very interesting question in terms of the craft of making. We talked yesterday in relation to the impact of disasters and in general terms, the First and Second World War killed so many human beings that not only was it a human tragedy that they were lost, families lost, but also craft and artisanship was lost by millions of people and their history that would have gone back for ancient times through the hands of human beings. And it's a very interesting question about the tactility of the participants. I think one of the things that really interests us is that a Biennale of architecture is different to an art Biennale, because architecture is a different thing. And we were very interested in the response of the participants in including the non-architect. And when you talk about the kind of sensation and sensory connection that we had a kind of a list. We went through, you know, the materials that we love. We made a list of mud and snow and leather and bamboo and the smell of bamboo. I just can't find our list here just at the moment, but it was just interesting that in the end, architecture is made by materials. Architecture is not a concept. We are held within the materiality of a space. And I suppose what we love about the dimension, I mean, as architects, what we do is we work with dimension. The over 300 meters long, that's actually written on the floor so that you don't forget what you stand in. That's our tool. We have a scale rule, you know, that's our tool of measurement. And I suppose for the general public, it's also the pleasure. I don't know how many benches we have. We have, you know, a huge timber log from Raphael Moneo. We have a leather finished one from Caminada. We have a canvas that it's also that you as a person relate to. Like it's interesting on one of the Australian. There's a kind of an eyepiece in the Australian. Exhibit, and it's formed by absolutely beautifully crafted timber. It's we talked about who the president. He was saying it's actually like having a pipe. You know, it's so well crafted because it's to do with your face. I think that what we feel is celebrated, and we hope that people enjoy it, is that architects have a fantastic range of ability, from the most general concept to do with, you know, protecting a city from rising tide, let's say. And then we have the ability to craft a tile, a handmade tile that makes a beautiful floor. And they're interesting kind of juxtaposition. You know, you're standing in the howling wind of Greenland, and you come out the door and you step on the mud of Bangladesh, one of the densest countries in the world with the lowest geography. And it's just interesting in terms of materials. So we are really delighted that there's a range of materials, that the craft of making and intrigue and the hard work that each of the participants have invested to try to communicate.
May I add to this answer a reminder? Look at the last 3 biennales, just to go back to the theme of the chains of the chain of the biennales. The last 3 biennale can be one single volume in 3 chapters about the relationship between technology and architecture. The one, Colas, dealt with the most recent technology and our needs and our welfare and our security problems, and technology stepping in as a major persona that was almost hampering the architect to develop his own autonomy. The thinking about the volumes and the buildings here was in charge to envisage and design. So most recent technology as a factor that may limit architecture. Then we had the Ravenna Biennale who says, no, wait a minute, possibly in present time, the last technology is not necessarily the best. Where a well-framed demand, a well-developed demand meets the correspondent efficient supply and answer, possibly the technology that is considered the best certainly is not the last. And we come to this Biennale where technology, what is technology? No new technology make the old ones obsolete. And this somehow is an incredible gesture of the world of architecture that speaks the language of the world of art. For an artist, but this is very interesting to learn that also for architects, no technology is a winner by itself. And the imagination and the thinking about what architecture is for may lead to solutions that are not necessarily conditioned by the development of technology. Or they may be the very subtle junction of past and present, but what matters is human skill.
Hello. I would know about the curatorial process, the research. Did you travel around the world? Did you have collaborators spread? How it worked?
We didn't travel around the world. We did have friends and advisors, and we researched in our libraries, we researched in publications. We spent actually a very long time researching and looking, because we wanted to discover work we didn't know, and we wanted to discover about parts of the world we didn't know. And that was a real joy, to discover really good architects whose work we never knew. So it was really a combination of research, of suggestions from people whose opinion we respected, who helped us, and some of the advice we took and some we didn't. So I think there was a very long lead-in period, and we had quite a long list which we then had to edit. So it was a piece of research.
I think I'd like to add to that, which is something that we both feel very strongly, that when we did this long period of research, there were many people whose work within that particular genre was of exceptional standard, whom we would have liked to have included. But we had to make the difficult choice of having representatives, if you like, chosen from that. So what we are emboldened by and enriched by is to know that the world is full of sincere practicing architects whose work is of the highest value. But for us, we had to limit, because every building, even though they're enormous, have their limits as well. So for the architects who are in the tissue, the soft tissue, just beyond the point of our choice, we sincerely support the hard work and brilliance of their achievements as well. The fact that they're not included is not a sign of exclusion, but just we had to make, if you like, representative choices within various genres. So the thing that I think that we feel, and our team feels very strongly, is that, and Shelley referred to it, that architecture is an incredibly optimistic discipline, difficult but optimistic, and there are many warriors around the world achieving a lot.
Do you hear me? Yeah. I'm from the national newspaper in Norway. You have chosen two architects from Norway, Jensen Skodvin and Rantala Egertsson. That's quite rare. How will you describe their architectural footprint? I mean, why did you pick those two? And my second question is, what can Nordic architecture add to this year's theme, Free Space?
Jensen Skodvin's work we've known for many years, and we think they have a very original approach to the way they deal with context, with construction. And I suppose the first project we saw was that roadway they made through the forest, where they protected the trees with rope and where they had a highly engineered path which seemed easy. So instead of cutting down the trees to make a roadway, they kept the trees and got the cars to slow down. And we found that way of thinking extremely refreshing. And many of their buildings we have followed since then, we always find them challenging and refreshing. And so that's why we invited them. Rintala Egertsson, we invited because they construct, they seem to think through building. They don't separate construction from idea. They represent, I suppose, what we really support as a movement, which is this idea of Baukultur, that construction and culture are inseparable. So that was why we chose those two. How Nordic architecture affects architecture in general is a bigger question. I suppose we're affected by, I can't really say that it brings something in my mind, I can't say that it has something that is specific in terms of how it affects architecture. Maybe it's climate?
I think it's really important to remember that Norway is a really important possible leader in architecture. You have a long, thin country. It's in section, has hydropower, it has fishing, it has natural resources. You have a small population, relatively speaking, and you are rich. And you're in a very, very powerful position to lead the world in terms of sustainability, in terms of way forward. And we look to you in terms of there are many places in the world that don't have those resources. And I think that it's we find your relationship as a people to the value and sustainable issues of nature and the sense of interconnecting the world, the built world with nature, really very important. Since 2008, half of the world's population will live in cities. It gets, in the next 50 years, I think it's 2/3 of people will live in the built world. And Shelley and I discuss, and our team, we discuss architecture as the new geography. So it's really a challenge, I suppose, to a nation like yours to lead the world in terms of densification. Like there's an interesting critique, I suppose, by Crimson in the Central Pavilion, where they talk about a city of comings and goings. And there's issues of how do we integrate peoples, how do we integrate landscape and building.
Okay. Yes, please.
Good morning. Ana Chuzabal Beascoa from El País in Spain. First of all, it's obviously very well intended, your theme this year, free space, but you keep repeating the need to communicate with the real world, basically, with the people who are not architects and so on and so forth. And so far, from what I've seen in the show, in the whole show, I am missing a part of public space. I mean, public space is obviously a place for encounters, for playing, for learning, but it's also a place where conflict occurs and happens, and shooting happens, and many bad things do happen. And also public space is a vanishing part of our cities, and it's something that is not even considered by many architects who are building in different areas of the world. So I wonder about that part of that side, like the dark side, the bad side of public space. What you can tell about it. Thank you.
Well, the way we thought about it, well, first of all, free space has many different meanings, which Yvonne described. And there are some projects which deal with surface, which deal with the wall between the interior and the exterior. And in a sense, we feel that if the language of architecture is a rich language, is a generous language, that it automatically makes common space or public space or gives to the citizen or the passerby or the stranger. And in a way, we haven't excluded public space, and there are examples of public space. We weren't focusing on free space as public space. We were focusing on ways of thinking, and that when you enrich an architectural language or present a series of options in terms of the richness of language, that in itself anticipates public space. And I think that's really important, because when you think about moving through a city, if you walk among buildings which are harsh and cold and not giving, and make you feel alienated and outside and don't make you feel good, that's not good public space. If you walk, even if it's an alleyway or an archway, and it makes you feel good, if you move in a space which gives you shade from the sun. So we think public space isn't about scale, it's about a sense of the civic, a sense of the public, even in the making of a house. So we were really focusing on the basics of architecture in a way that if one thinks about light and shade and hot and cold and how even the smallest project can enrich the lives of human beings, that in itself is public space.
May I was ask one word, because I really somehow did really appreciate your question, which is more or less goes to the point. If you choose one theme and indicate sort of one of the purposes of architecture and one of the aims of a biennale, why don't you show where these aspirations or these intuitions or these hopes are destroyed or are not applied, or these principles? It's where a biennale should have in itself also the counter biennale. So to be clear, this would be fascinating, but to do it, I would need another couple of arsenale to show where all mistakes to make the exhibition of horrors or the exhibition of mistakes or insufficient solutions. But that's a good reaction. I mean, it's exactly, we expect from the visitor to see here something that might provoke even the question that you were posing. I mean, this is a place where we give hints. It's not our aim to represent the whole world. It's to give the visitor the sword that allows him to disentangle his thinking among all these complexities.
May I say
yes.
also that within, it's very interesting that it's a Spanish question in terms of that you use public space in a very strong way. And for us, there's two things I would answer to you. One, that within the translation of the word free space, that it's also within each of the cultures of the languages that are here, that people then think about what is the free space within their particular culture, because of their climate, because of the way they are as a people. But just in terms of sample, if you look at, say, a project in the Giardini by Michael Molson, where there is housing by the Skid Row Trust, what's really interesting is that in his case, he's kept the ground floor relationship to the city of Los Angeles. He's a community of people who are outside so-called normal society, and he's made the free space below these housing for the people to form their own community. And I think there are both, what we find interesting in the range of work that we have, it's both conceptual and physical. So I think it's really a challenge. We would like the Free Space Manifesto to be kind of used as a litany, as a checklist. That it's not like, say, Moneo has described the free space in Murcia, which is a place of people gathering. So it's not just free space where building isn't, it's also where buildings are related to one another.
Thank you. Over there.
Polona from Slovenian public TV station. I would have two questions. The first refers to your own architecture practice, and it is because of you emphasizing space. When and how did you discover that it is actually the space, so to say, the choreography of space that is the gist of architecture practice? And the second one would be, which importance do you ascribe to the task of renovations? And why I'm asking this, it is because the Slovenian architect Maruša Zorec, who is also presented here in the main exhibition, she's presenting only renovative projects. Thank you.
When did we discover space? That's a big question. I don't know if there...
When you were born.
When we were born, yeah. Yvonne loves the space under a piano. I think that's maybe what did it. I think we feel that the language of architecture is about making space, and we find that very liberating as a way of thinking, because sometimes the whole emphasis of, say, of a client is, what does this look like? What is it going to look like? How does it represent me? How does it represent my company? How does it represent my institution? And what we have found very liberating over time is that, yes, we think about that, but we also think about what kind of room does it make outside as well as making space inside. And somehow thinking as space makers is much more liberating than thinking about ourselves as object makers. So we think that space making is the stuff of architecture, whatever scale, interior, exterior. And in terms of reuse, we think that reuse is hugely important. And there are many examples of reuse, including the example you refer to, which is very beautiful and very sensitive interventions in existing buildings. And especially now where there's very often a lack of respect of the existing, and the lack of respect for resources and materials, and buildings are demolished which maybe sometimes are not necessary to demolish. I think Lacaton Vassal have really focused on that as an issue, that maybe you don't always need to demolish, that you build, that you never demolish, that you always add and you don't subtract. And there's an exhibit, it's called Yellow to Red, where there's a book published by a Swiss architect where he makes the case that that every project is reuse. You're reusing something, and that contemporary architecture and the language of architecture became enriched when architects suddenly realized we don't have to demolish, and architects had to deal with buildings like this and became more sensitive to traditional construction. And let's say the conservation movement, certainly in Ireland, that's what keeps craft alive, because people have to know about how buildings move, how a mortar has to take in different, brick moving against concrete, all of those things, that there's a kind of a softer approach to construction in historic buildings, which has now fed itself into ways of thinking about new buildings. So we think it's hugely important.
I'd just like to say that when Shelley refers to me under a piano, I was probably about 2 or 3 years of age. My mother played a baby grand. It was made of walnut. There was varnished timber floors. I was on a cushion and I moved around on my back underneath the piano. And it's one of my earliest memories of space, of this loving mother, the walnut piano, the sound of music, a cushion and varnished timber. So it's just in some, I don't go, actually, recently I went to, it's in my brother's house, and I crawled in under the piano. It's a kind of a slightly different thing years and years later.
Well, by the way, just let me pop in for a moment. We have been renovating 40,000 square meters in the Arsenale and other 30,000 square meters in the Lido and in the center of Venice. Yeah, this is the work of 20 years, but we have not built one single volume to be a new volume, or not adding one single cube meter to what already existed. So, I mean, we are participants in this Biennale with our contribution. Anybody else? Yes, please.
Hi. This is Piero Alessio Rizzardi from TCA Think Tank, Italy. I wanted to ask a question, especially in this period of time, in 2019, what was your consideration to really choose the topic of the free space and the quality of the architecture in itself?
Well, the free space, we wanted to have a topic, as we said earlier on, that it would be about space and it would be about something that's free. We mean about generous within topic of space. So we wanted a new word that was easily accessible to not just architects, but to the general public.
Anybody else? Over there is a hand in the dark of the...
Hi, I'm Krithika, I'm from the United States, and I wanted to ask you if you can comment on the relationship between free space and the city of Venice, whose space is increasingly not free for Venetians, and is increasingly unaffordable for Venetians. So I was wondering if you can comment on the relationship between the theme this year and the Biennale as an institution with the city of Venice.
It's me for Want to answer you?
Well,
then I have something to say.
Yes, absolutely. A number of journalists have asked us this question. We don't feel equipped to answer this question, really, because it's quite complex. That's why I think President Baratta is a more equipped person. And there are so many issues in Venice that we are completely sympathetic to. We still think it's important as visitors and as architects to also appreciate what it is and that it has survived and how energizing the place is, how every time one comes here, one feels changed, one walks away a slightly different person, one has learned something more about imagination, about ingenuity, about civilization, how civilizations can fall and rise and survive and continue. And it's not out of naivety, but it's that there are some things we are not in control of, and we simply find that this is such an energizing, hugely important city in terms of architecture.
Well, it's, you know, we are back to the questions about the Venice, her future, her present conditions. But remember that the problem of Venice is not only just how to manage tourism or where or not, and how you can avoid excessive sort of non-desired use of it, big ships and so on and so forth. The problem of Venice is to find what new to bring here besides and beyond tourism. So it's useless to complain about the stealing of Venice by tourism, and unless we are capable of suggesting what to develop together with, or in addition to, or instead of. I am an admirer of the Ruskin who wrote The Stones of Venice, but if I had to write a book on Venice myself, I would choose the title The Veins of Venice, the incredible spaces that are here, left by the old republic, the old self-sufficient Republic of Venice, for which we have to find new usage, which means the problem is which activities you can develop in the city to give her a chance of becoming a fully fledged city and not only a place for tourism. And I can tell you that the Biennale by itself is providing at least a reply, an answer. Venice is a place where veins have to be filled with blood. We need blood, new blood, and we are offering an answer. Venice is the ideal city for all those institutions that has as their aim the dialogue with the world. Venice is a wonderful hosting city for institutions like ours that fill the veins of Venice with an energy that is devoted to exchanges, to the dialogue with the world. This, it's an example that should be followed and could be followed by others and could be considered by national or international institutions, because we gave an example that it can be done. Not only it can be done, it can be very well done and great success. And if you are here not because of the stones of Venice, but you are here because of the blood that the Biennale brings in the veins of Venice. So I'm ready to take part to any discussion about the spaces in Venice if the question is, how are we going to fill those spaces? They are empty but not free. And this is, make the space free means the space that can considered as a fruitful space for all the initiatives and all of those who work in the city. And we are a good example. Why not put a bit of hope, couple of drops of hope on the discussions about Venice, who, I'm afraid, are always somehow conditioned by a desire of pessimism. Thank you.
May I add to that it's not just an issue to do with this city, but that in Dublin or in Palma, the issue of how cities, when they are attractive in many ways, attract people, and the Airbnb, the phenomenon of travel has changed the whole way of how cities react to themselves. So there are other issues to do with policy around the world. It's true in Dublin and it's true in Palma, it's true in many other places. It's a policy issue.
Any other question?
Hello, I'm Sigrid from Dam Magazine. I wanted to ask you a question. I think you have been asked already lots of times, but I haven't heard it yet, so here we go. It's about women in architecture. A good friend of mine, Josie Vanny, you also selected her. We talk a lot about that, how difficult it is for women they have to be, in a way, more talented to prove themselves in architecture. It still is some kind of a man's world. And it takes much more time before they really get appreciated in a way. Did your selection also, did you focus on purpose, or how did you do the selection? Because this is the first time there's a lot of women also participating. Did you also have a lot of problems in this world of architecture, or was it easier for you? Is there a way for young women how they should be in the future, to be more participating in this world, since I know a lot of young women architects who have a lot of problems, actually?
In terms of the choice, we chose the best architects we could find to represent our manifesto. We're 2 architects. And in terms of our experience, maybe it's because we're Irish, we have never been obstructed from doing anything we wanted to do. And we've actually never been discriminated against, or if we have, we didn't notice. And that is our experience. We are absolutely supportive and sympathetic for the problems that exist. I would say it's not only young women. I would say that it's very difficult for young architects to access work. In fact, sometimes it's very difficult for old architects to access work. I think the process of commissioning work, in a way, it obstructs the flourishing of talent in architecture, which is why so many architects have had to develop different forms of practice. So this is really a short answer to a big question. You asked, did we choose based on women? The answer is no. Did we have problems practicing as women architects? The answer is not yet. Maybe it will happen, but that has not been our experience. Are we sympathetic and supportive for the injustices, let's say, or the inequalities that exist? The answer is yes. And there are many, many other, I think, issues which affect architecture. When we look around the world and see the issues that affect the flourishing of architecture, be they political or commercial or economic, and we're sympathetic to those as well, because our belief is that as architects, what we have to do is keep the culture of architecture alive, and where we can, that we support each other, and we support each other fully in all of these struggles, let's say.
It's for me, it's really a matter of embarrassment to answer these questions, because for the first time since I could imagine the question of this sort might arise, I'm here with some figures about the presence of women in the Biennale, which is something that has not been considered as a problem by itself. But having 2 curators who are women architects, having a jury with 3 women architects out of 5 members, being the president of the jury, a woman architect, being the director of the architectural sector of the Biennale, a woman architect, being the director of the building office, taking care of the buildings of the Biennale, 2 women architects, living in an institution where 75% of managers and people in general are women. I feel embarrassed, because if I had to ever to think about a sort of 50-50 relations, I had to go back to decades ago. So we are in this line. I wish that many institutions follow our example, which has been somehow an unexpected result, simply because we didn't have the problem neither in negative nor in formally statistically positive way. Thank you.
I'd like to say that unequal pay is disgraceful. So, Shelley and I, that's just incomprehensible. But I'd just like to leave with or finish probably the questions, that we fundamentally believe that imagination is not a gender issue.
Good.
Al tema della Biennale Free Space, inteso come spazio pubblico disponibile appunto per il pubblico. Volevo chiedere alle curatrici, anche al Presidente se lo vorrà fare, di commentare brevemente l'esperienza che la catena di supermercati Tesco in America ha fatto, inserendo in tutti gli spazi pubblici di pertinenza delle loro attività con delle borchie appuntite come dei dissuasori, diciamo, per animali. Appunto per impedire alle persone senza tetto, o comunque insomma alle persone che non stavano lì ad acquistare, di starne lontani. E nello specifico, se un oggetto, come è stato detto dal politologo Langdon Winner a proposito se un oggetto inanimato può essere politico, cioè può costituire una premessa politica, come commentare appunto questa iniziativa della catena Tesco? Grazie.
I don't know this issue, I'm ashamed to say. I think that it is a human responsibility to take care of those who are less fortunate than ourselves. It's a very complex issue you raise. I don't know the answer. I think that we have to voice that that the public realm is shared by everyone. I think that's what's interesting about, I suppose, the research of A City of Coming and Goings, that by Crimson, that is really raising the question about that cities aren't just places of perfection, that they are cities of overlap and sharing. And I had an Indian friend who said to me about prejudice many, many years ago. He said, "Yvonne, we all have tigers stalking." I thought that was a very interesting phrase, that we all have fear of the unknown, but in fact in the city of comings and goings, the questions asked are how can we mingle and not be afraid of otherness. I think this is a kind of a human condition that we need to discuss, but it's a very emotional topic, and it affects vulnerable human beings, and it's something that we do need to voice.
Ultime domande? Sì, prego.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you. I am Yeşim Aktulu from Turkey. Thank you for this organization again. And for Venice, I want to say something related with the La Biennale di Venezia. I think you did the best for attracting the people all around the world to support Venice stay alive. Because when I was doing my researches in archives in Porto Marghera so many years ago with the permission of La Biennale, I have learned that the idea came in 1894 first, the birth of La Biennale di Venezia. Later, 1 year later, in 1895, the first Biennale took place. And now when we arrived here, we always think about positive for the future, because really in Venice, especially, there are lots of spaces to be visited, to be seen, to be experienced through the occasions like La Biennale di Venezia. I want to congratulate all of you in the name of architecture. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to you. Thank you. Very kind. Yes, okay. That's, here we are. I just wanted to add one final consideration. I give it some importance to it. Remember that we have the 63 participating countries. We never raise the telephone to promote the participation of a country. The participation of a country is free. We invite countries only when they ask us to be invited. This is a rule that is a fundamental rule here. We are not an expo, we are not a fair, an exhibition. Here come only those who really want to come because they want to participate in this free dialogue among people and among curators, among artists, among architects. So mind these rules because they are really part of our way of working and thinking. Thanks to Yvonne and Shelley. Many thanks to their team, many thanks to the team of the Biennale who is doing always great jobs and improving every year, if I may say so. And thank all of you for being with us and enjoy the day and the exhibition. Thank you very much.